What's good, everybody? Chris here again. Chris Goes Outdoors, and in this video we're going to start another Appalachian Trail series. I hope you're not getting sick of the Appalachian Trail videos. I have a lot I want to talk about the AT. I think the videos will help future thru hikers, so hope you stay tuned for this one. And in this series of videos, we're going to do kind of a state-by-state overview. It's actually been requested by a fair amount of people too, so I'm excited to get into this. These videos have taken a lot of time to prep for. I got notes. I got a lot of notes. And in this set of videos, we're going to take a look at trail conditions at the time, how I was feeling throughout the state, certain shelters I stayed at, maybe water sources that I remember. Going to take a look at towns I stopped in, places I stayed at, resupply options and stuff in town that I remember. Anything that I can really remember about the state, I have it listed right here in these notes. And of course, we're going to be heading northbound because that's how I headed out on the Appalachian Trail. So let's start it off. Let's talk about Georgia. Alright, so we're heading down to Georgia. I, in particular, flew down from Boston, Massachusetts, right out of Logan. I landed in Atlanta somewhere. I flew JetBlue. I believe the ticket one way was around $85 to $95. Travel cost, that's going to be completely different depending where you're coming from, but I don't know, if you're coming from Logan around April 1st, maybe that's what you can look forward to, roughly $100. And I stayed at the time at the Hiker Hostel. So the Hiker Hostel has now been sold. I think it's called Barefoot Hills Hostel. And when I stayed there at the Hiker Hostel, it was around $100. I believe the actual price to stay there was $85, and I think it was a little extra if you wanted breakfast in the morning. So roughly around $100. It appears that the Barefoot Hills Hostel, it's doubled in price. And some people might say that and be like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. I'm not gonna lie, for $100, what they gave you at the Hiker Hostel, it was a bargain to say the least. So that included a shuttle from the train. Once you get to the Atlanta airport, I forget the actual train station, you can jump on the train right from the airport, and they tell you to get on the train, and whatever station was that they asked you to meet up at, I'll try to leave down here. So it's included a shuttle from the train. They stopped at Walmart also, so you can get whatever you need last minute for the trail. Maybe you didn't have food or something, you needed to stock up, get stuff for the trail. Stay at the hostel, of course. I did leave breakfast in the morning, so I think it may have been included, I can't really remember. And then the next morning, after you stay, you get a shuttle to either Amicalola Falls or the top of Springer Mountain. For what you get, it was a great package at $100. It was an incredible package at $100. And in all honesty, I think $200 is fairly reasonable. From where they even pick you up back to the hostel, it's still a pretty long ride. I feel like it was like 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. So they're driving a pretty good ways to get you, coming back and forth. And I think it's a reasonable price to pay if it's around $200 now. Of course, you can look at other options. I've heard some people actually Ubered down there, so keep that in mind. There are other possibilities. You could Uber, maybe even taxi, or arrange something with a shuttle driver. So once you find your way down to the Georgia area, you have the option, of course, to head up to either Springer Mountain. There is a parking lot, I believe, that's roughly a mile away from the top of Springer Mountain, or you can head to Amicalola State Falls and do the approach trail. I did the approach trail, and I do highly recommend that you do it too. The people at the visitor center there were super cool. We got there first thing in the morning, and they were hard at work already. So there's a little gift shop and stuff there, information center. And when we got there, so you go through like a little alleyway, and then you pop up and you see the big archway that you see in all the videos. And I don't know, to me that was it was kind of a special moment. As corny as it sounds, it was like, oh man, we're here. And it was a great thing to see, so I got goosebumps. I don't know if you can see them. I remember like it was yesterday. So yeah, we walked out right into the archway, and we took a bunch of pictures, so it was 4 of us. And there was a gentleman on the left-hand side who had a little table set up, and they were checking in through hikers outside, so he had his, the check-in list so you can register your hike there. And he'd talk to you, whatever information you needed. He was full of information. They have a scale there too, so you can weigh your pack if that's what you're into. And I believe they also have a shelter there. So if you do happen to get in, say, late the night before, you could, in theory, get shuttled or dropped off somewhere at Amicalola State Park, and I guess that there is a shelter there that you can stay the night before your through hike. So keep that in mind too. If you do the approach trail, you get to get dropped off at Amicalola Falls. You can register your hike, which is good for the ATC. It's good that they can keep track of these numbers. Of course, registration is completely voluntary, but I do believe that the numbers help them. It's got to help them in some way with like funding and stuff like that. So even if you don't start at the approach trail, you can register your through hike on the ATC's website, and I would recommend you do so. It's beautiful. I mean, the waterfalls there are very, very nice, and it's just a great sight to see. So we took our time going up it, and it was enjoyable, very enjoyable. So, and also it's kind of a nice introduction as to what you're getting yourself into. So the approach trail, it's I don't know, 700 or however many steps it is, and it just kind of goes like straight up. It's a very short glimpse of what you're about to get yourself into on the Appalachian Trail. So if you go to the approach trail and you're having outrageous difficulty, you may have a bad time on the Appalachian Trail. Of course, your body kind of adjusts itself as it keeps going, but you know, do the approach trail. I think it's really part of the journey, in my opinion. I kind of wish they would start the trail at the approach trail instead of on top of Springer, but whatever works. My final thought on the approach trail, the people are like, I'm not doing the extra mileage. It's 8 more miles. What's 8 more miles on top of 2,200? So, I don't know, that's my thought, especially in the beginning, you know, an extra 8 miles. Like, yeah, whatever, woo! At least it was for me, so I don't know. My thoughts anyway, do the approach trail. It was beautiful. People at Amicalola, super friendly. I don't know, the archway for me was kind of a cool deal, so it is my recommendation that you do the approach trail. So, you do the approach trail. After the initial climb up the approach trail, I don't remember anything about the actual trail being too difficult. I remember getting on the actual trail, so out of like the park area and onto the trail like in the woods, and as someone who's hiked in New Hampshire, essentially all his hiking experience up to that point was New Hampshire and Maine, I was kind of shocked at how different the trail was. It was much less rocky and rooty, and it was a very different change of pace for me, and I was kind of like, whoa, this is pretty cool. So the trail I didn't think particularly was too difficult, and eventually you roll up to Springer Mountain. As far as Springer Mountain goes, it's a little, I don't want to say it, underwhelming. There's not really, there is a little bit of a view off, there's kind of like a little clearing where you can see down to. There's also a nice little sign that you can take a picture at. It's like a plaque put into the rock up there. You see a lot of people initially when they start the trail have their picture taken up there. I have mine as well, of course. And then there is a trail log up there too, if you want to sign in, of course. And it's almost, it looks like an oven. Like right on the summit. It's underneath like a big old rock. They usually have a trail log up there. When we went, there was also a ridge runner up there who was just suggesting campgrounds for the night. And it turns out a lot of people had heard that Springer Mountain campsite is usually packed. So most people were heading to the next campsite, which is actually where we were, and that is, Stover Creek Shelter. So apparently everybody skipped Springer because they always heard it was so packed. And she was like, nobody's staying there. Keep in mind that if you do want to stay up at the shelter at Springer, it's possible that it won't be as crowded as Stover Creek. So that first night, of course, we did the approach trail. So that was 8 miles, and then we headed another 2.8 to the Stover Creek Shelter, and I recall tons of camping space at this shelter. And for obvious reasons, it's right at the start of the trail, of course. You know, they're probably going to make it a pretty large shelter to accommodate that many people. The shelter was huge and had a covered porch area. That's great, especially when it's raining. The shelters with the covered porches with a table underneath were a godsend. It was nice to be able to kind of sit down and cook away from the rain. Nice little thing to have. Water was super ample, and it was very, very close to the shelter. After that, we moseyed on the next day. So we did so we got to mile 8.1, so it was, I don't know, can I math? 5 miles that day. And we stayed at the Hawk Mountain Shelter. For what it's worth, there is a Hawk Mountain campground, I believe, half a mile or something before this. I actually went there thinking it was the shelter, and it wasn't. So don't make the mistake I did. And the reason we stopped in 5 miles, it was monsoon raining out that day. I got absolutely soaked. I remember getting to the Hawk Mountain Shelter, and I was drenched, like absolutely drenched. My buddy Fudd, my German friend who I was hiking with, was already there. So I got in the shelter, and he was like, Chris, you made it. just drenched, wringing out my clothing. And yeah, Hawk Mountain Shelter was interesting. And this is a massive shelter. There's tons of camping spots. I had mentioned in my AT start date video and why I would possibly change it. This was one of the busiest campgrounds I had ever seen in my life. I don't think I had ever seen this many people stay at a campsite. And a lot of that, of course, was due to the weather. I think people were just done. They were just like, I'm not pushing on this. So I think that caused kind of a bubble of people to get stuck like right in that shelter. Other than that, it was a nice spot. They did have some stuff roped off. I think they were trying to like revegetation in a couple of areas. It had extremely easy water access and it's very easy to get to. So we moseyed on out of there. I do remember around mile 19, Ramrock Mountain had a pretty epic view. Around mile 21.8, Preaching Rock, also, I believe that's the name of it, had a very impressive viewpoint. I remember that one very well. So the next night we went to Lands Creek, that's mile 24.3, at least in 2017. And it was a pretty small area with a lot of people in it. That bubble from Hawk Mountain, you know, we pushed, what was it, 16 miles that day, and still a ton of people. So this is a very small area. I remember, I think in the book it says it's only intended for like a couple people, but there were a ton of people there. And as I recall, there's almost like a access road that goes around it, and there were people all camped on like the access road. The good thing, we pushed 16 that day, and this was because impending weather coming the next day, and we were to go over Blood Mountain the next morning. That was the plan. We'll push real hard that day. We did the 16, and then we'll have a fairly easy day into Neels Gap. Out of Lands Creek, we hiked very early that next morning, so I think we left camp at like 4 in the morning, and we went over the top of Blood Mountain at mile 29.3, and we got on top of Blood Mountain. It was right as maybe a little bit after the sun had just risen. So I didn't find the hike particularly too difficult up Blood Mountain. A lot of people seem to have thought it was definitely on the difficult side. I just personally did not think so. I would consider myself, at the time when I started, in relatively good hiking shape. Again, I did a lot of hiking up in the Whites in New Hampshire before coming out to the trail, and I would consider myself fairly fit at that time. Again, some people did think Blood Mountain was pretty difficult. We got up and over Blood Mountain right in the morning, and then got down into Neels Gap. There was an impending snowstorm, so they got snow on top of Blood Mountain that afternoon. So we literally just missed the storm. You could literally see the clouds moving in while we were on top. So glad we pushed the mileage the day before, and I'm glad that we got down when we did. We got down to Neels Gap, so that is mile 31.7. We beat the storm. And the outfitter there, Mountain Crossings, that's the spot where a lot of people end up getting off the trail. They find the trail is not what they wanted. Maybe it's too difficult. Maybe it's just not what they hoped it would be. It's a very iconic, I think, place on the Appalachian Trail. You see it in, you know, everybody's videos mostly. We went in there. I had mailed a resupply box to myself there just because I know that we passed right through it. And I bought a Coke there as well. They do charge you to pick up your box. It's nothing expensive. I think it's like $1. Not a big deal, just worth mentioning so you know. In general, the gear here is definitely on the pricey side. You're paying a convenience fee for sure. I'm a, you know, pretty big gear geek, so I went around and was looking at stuff, and I was like, damn, prices were for some stuff in there was pretty steep. Realize that if you do need gear there, especially some of the bigger stuff, you're probably going to pay kind of a convenience fee, if you will. It is worth mentioning that they do, I believe, have a hostel attached directly to that building, and there's also some cabins, I guess, a little bit down the road. We did not stay there. We had 3 of us that were still together from the beginning. Well, 2 of us, me, Fudd, and then we picked up Guy Nomad, and then so there were 3 of us, and we were like, yeah, let's find a 4th guy, you know, we'll split a room, we'll head down to Blairsville. Blairsville is the closest town to that area, and we had a trail angel who shuttled us down to Blairsville, and we spent the night at the Seasons Inn. And again, 4 of us, we picked up some random kid. I still don't even remember his name. It was roughly like $20 a night between us. $80 for a room, whatever, $20 a person. The rooms were pretty nice, nothing too fancy. The people who ran it were ultra friendly. I remember the woman in particular, I forget her name, but she was like a sweetheart. They also had coin laundry available, which of course is huge. Got to get your laundry done. And we ate at Copeland's Burgers and Southern Eats in town there. That place was so good. So good. The bartender there was super cool too. She offered us a ride to the trail the next morning if we wanted it. Unfortunately, we ended up dying from noro, which maybe I'll get into. Really good food, cheap beer, had the mushroom and Swiss burger. Excellent. Cabin Coffee and Company is right across the street there too. They had exceptionally fast internet. I uploaded, I think, 2 videos in that coffee shop, and I think it took 15 minutes to upload both. And then directly across from the parking lot of the Seasons Inn was a place called Papa's Pizza, and they had a pizza buffet available. So needless to say, we sampled all the cuisine of that little town center there. And we did catch Noro, so it's something that if you're starting in a very busy part of the season that you may have to worry about. And everybody in that area, not just the people in that hotel. I did talk to the woman at Seasons Motel, and she said most of the hikers here were spending extra days because everybody was sick. I remember talking to people after the fact. People in the cabins were all getting sick, and they shut the hostel down back at Neels Gap. And from what I was told, they put up a sign that said like closed for renovations or something. I'm pretty sure they were just bleaching the entire building because everybody who started the trail at that point got sick. It's hard to avoid. Noro is extremely contagious. Bring some soap, wash your hands, stay away from other people, don't reach into trail magic. Blech. Blech. Look up videos on avoiding Noro on the trail. In Blairsville, I did not resupply personally, but there is a small grocery store that's right behind the Seasons Inn, and they seem to have had everything that could keep you going. We also went to a breakfast place one of the days called Hole in the Wall. It was a small breakfast since we were recovering from Noro, but it was pretty good, very reasonably priced. There is also a Chick-fil-A within walking distance to the Seasons Inn, maybe a 5 to 10 minute walk. There's also an ATM there. I actually went to the ATM, that's why I saw the Chick-fil-A. Yeah, Blairsville, cool town, cool people, great little spots you can go to, and you can resupply and enjoy your time there. The night we left Neels Gap, we ended up staying at the Low Gap shelter. That was mile 43.2, and this area was, again, packed with people. The shelter looked really nice. I opted to stay in my tent, and it's the first night that I actually met Spitfire, who became one of my trail fan, and it was the night Elmer Fudd actually got his trail name. We were talking to Spitfire. She was sitting in the shelter. Me and Dan were on the trail, just, you know, chatting back and forth. And she was like, "Do you have a trail name yet?" And he was like, "I do not. Why?" And she was like, "You should be called Elmer Fudd." And I just remember like, oh, like it's the perfect nickname. He's like, I do not understand. And she's like, "You seen Looney Tunes?" He's German. She didn't know if Looney Tunes was. He's like, yes, I'm familiar with. And she goes, "Say Rascally Rabbit." And he's like, "Wascally, oh." It was good. It was good stuff. So, yeah, that's where Fudd got his name from. Water, very easy to get to. It's literally like spitting distance, not spitting distance is a bad term when describing the water source, but you can see the water source from the shelter. So it's 100, not even 100, it's probably 50 feet from the shelter. So water very close to the shelter, and plenty of camping spots. The shelter was pretty big too. So after that night, I feel like the trail was a little bit more difficult, and I think a lot of that had to do with still recovering from Noro. I was just feeling so weak, and if you watch the videos of that hike, you can see it too. Like, I feel like I'm really pale in them, and I say once we get to the next site we stayed at that night that like I just was not feeling it. Like, I feel like I was still almost dehydrated from sickness. Another thing too, I guess, if you do get Noro, consider taking an extra day or two off. You'll feel like you want to get out. I was itching to get back out. Like, I feel like I was getting stir crazy, but I really could have used another day to like recover, like really like replenish myself. That night we stayed at the Cheese Factory site, mile 56. We kept referring to it as the Cheesecake Factory. Unfortunately, no delicious Bible-sized menu, but got there and ate some ramen and tuna, because, I don't know, that's what you do on the Appalachian Trail. And again, I felt like death. It was so bad. I remember it very, very specifically. The water was a bit of a walk, and I remember that area was like very, very buggy. Worked out well for us. To get to the water, you actually cross, I think, what's a Forest Service road or something like that. And it's the first time, oddly enough, I met Miss Janet. So I was walking down to the water source, and I heard like truck coming? I was like, who the hell is driving up here? And I turned, and I had never met her before, obviously. I was never really on the Appalachian Trail, besides in New Hampshire. I turned and I saw the van, and I've seen pictures of her van. It's a very, very easy to spot van. Rolling up the mountainside, and I was like, no way. So I stopped like on the side of the road and waved to her. And she stopped her truck, her van, rolled down her window, and I was like, "Yeah, Miss Janet." And she's like, yeah, how you doing? She's like, "You need anything on?" And I was like, no, I just wanted to say hello. And she's like, "Oh, good to see you, good luck out there." And she kept driving off. She had some guy in the back, I don't know, maybe skipping trail. So I don't know what he was doing. Maybe she was definitely shuttling him somewhere. I have no idea where that road goes. So if you do, maybe you can tell me where she was bringing him. That was my first interaction with Ms. Janet. And after that day, you end up climbing up Trey Mountain. That was mile 58.1 after the cheese factory site. And I believe the viewpoint was a little bit off trail. From what I remember, it's like a little wooden path you go up, and you just go up just a tiny bit, but definitely check it out. It was a beautiful, beautiful viewpoint. We stayed at Deep Gap on that night, so mile 66, and that shelter was huge as well. Make sure to get water on the walk down to the shelter. So you literally cross the water source for the shelter on your way to the shelter, so just make sure to get it on the way, I say. And this is the first time that I met the guy Tape that we hiked with, and the two Wisconsin brothers. They were part of our trail family for a while. Tape unfortunately did end up getting off the trail, but he was a pretty chill guy too. Plenty of camping spots around there. I actually did end up camping. The shelter was 2 floors. There was a nice little porch area. There was a little overhang with like a table attached to the shelter so that you could, cook or something on the side of the shelter. But the next day we came out at Dix Creek Gap, and I believe this is where the Top of Georgia Hostel is. It's within easy walking distance from there. I think it's like 0.2 miles just down a hill. Spitfire actually had a package sent there, so she went to go pick it up. And she came back up, and we were awaiting. There was a parking area there. We get some good trail magic. Guy I think he was from Florida. I think he mentioned he came up with his wife, and they were cooking up some hot dogs and stuff. It was delicious. And we were waiting in the parking area there because the Budget Inn had a shuttle that ran at specific times to pick up hikers and bring them into town. And we ended up taking that shuttle, and we ended up staying at the Budget Inn. So I believe that's the Budget Inn at Hiawassee. The hotel, I think, has been sold. I know a guy, Ron, was the one who ran it. I know he used to post a lot in the Appalachian Trail Facebook groups. I think he sold the hotel, so I do not know the current situation there. And a lot of people had mixed reviews about it. I will say it's a very no frills kind of hotel. I feel like it had a reputation on the trail because of this. Whether or not you think that was good or bad is up to you. But in all honesty, it had everything you need, and I feel like people were just being very dramatic about it. There was a coin laundry thing there, so they had it was almost like a like a outbuilding, is that what they call them? With laundry that you could do, and it was coin laundry. Mountain Crossings, the same outfitter at Neels Gap, also operates a very kind of small pop-up shop outfitter out of a building there, so they sell essentially some of the smaller and larger essentials that you may need. They had knee braces there. They had little bits and pieces like some trekking poles, some jackets, like just random odds and ends that you may find yourself needing on the trail. And that was kind of cool, unexpected to see. Was it the nicest motel on the Appalachian Trail? No, not really. But did it suffice? Yep. Did I live? Yep. Did I have any issue while I stayed there? Absolutely not. Would have stayed there again if I were on the trail. So I had no issue with it whatsoever. Maybe if you're one of those people who are like, I cannot stay in this place, you might have yourself an issue, but I for one did not mind it at all. Nobody in our party seemed to have, actually. So I think 13 people that jumped in that van and stayed at the Budget Inn just in that run. So that whole place was filled with hikers that night. Everywhere you looked was hikers. In the town itself, Hiawassee seemed pretty cool. For what it's worth, there's a Dairy Queen and a Taco Bell directly next to the Budget Inn. It was lovely. Got to share Mr. Elmer Fudd's first Dairy Queen experience, so that was pretty funny. He thoroughly enjoyed it. I didn't feel like walking to the grocery store, which was a little ways through the town. It would have been a little bit of a walk, and I didn't need a full resupply anyway. From what I was told, the grocery store was stocked. A legit grocery store. You could have bought anything that you needed, food-wise. I opted to go next door. They had a Rite Aid pharmacy, as I didn't need much. Just loaded up with what I did, and it wasn't too expensive. And the food store was Ingles, by the way. So after that, we shifted on back up, and on this day, I believe, was the day we crossed the Georgia-North Carolina border, mile 78.5. And this seemed like an eternity that we made it to the North Carolina border. And it's a very, very tiny sign on one of the trees there, so make sure you don't pass it. It's most noticeable as there's a little piece of pipe gets stuck in the tree, like the tree grew around the pipe, so keep an eye out for that pipe anyway. And yeah, once you did it, you made it through your first state, so it took us forever. I mean, between the Noro and the initial rain right off the bat, it felt like we would never get to North Carolina. We did finally make it. Felt great to make it into North Carolina. Should feel good. You made it through your first state, so you're in North Carolina. Of note, of course, there is a nice little seasonal stream it appears, that flows directly after the border. This was not listed, I don't think, in the guidebook, but we walked maybe 50 feet past the border, and there was a nice little seasonal stream that was flowing, so we filled up water there. And there is also possible option to camp right after there. There were a bunch of people that were doing it. There was a pretty cool tree up there. It had some name. I'll put it in the, I think I have a video of the tree. Congratulations, you made it through Georgia and you're in North Carolina. So some follow-up thoughts and notes that I have on Georgia in general. So Georgia, besides the Noro, was a very enjoyable stay for me. Starting on April 1st, or technically the weekend of the 1st and 2nd, when I did, was extremely crowded, more crowded than I would have liked. Check out my Appalachian Trail start date video. I'll leave a link up here if you want to see more about the start dates. I'm not going to go too much into detail. I was so excited to finally be out on the trail that like everything just felt incredible. I can't explain going to that Dairy Queen and Taco Bell when we got to Hiawassee, the amount of joy that I felt from eating that Dairy Queen. You'll find very quickly that it's the little things that carry you along the Appalachian Trail. The lack of leaves on the trail at this time made for very hot hiking days, so you still had the sun beating down on you all day. I was also being stupid and was wearing all black, of course. It was very warm. I'm from New England, where in April, it typically, it can still be freezing out. You can get snowstorms in April very often. And I wasn't quite used to the southern heat, so I think a bunch of the days we were there was 80s. Just be aware, maybe worth packing sunscreen as well. But yeah, you can definitely experience some very toasty weather, and the lack of leaf coverage will keep you very hot. Georgia also had some pretty epic views, and with the lack of leaf coverage, you could also see around you like pretty well. So like even areas where there wouldn't normally be a view, you could look around and there still was a view. That might be something to look forward to. I noticed, and this may seem a little strange to some, but living near Boston, grocery prices and stuff like that down south just seem so much cheaper, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's awesome. So like, I just noticed stuff up here that, may cost like 20 or 50 more cents, where like, so much cheaper down there, and I was like, all right, this is pretty sweet. So it was a very welcome thing, obviously, and it's something worth mentioning. I guess if you're from the Northeast, if you live near a major city even anyway, I feel like grocery prices are typically a little more expensive than elsewhere. So that was definitely a welcome sight down south. Another thing too, if you're from the Boston area, people here, geez, people are miserable. There's no other way to put it. I think Boston was rated one of like the most unfriendly cities. You can see that any day. If I walk down the street and like someone's passing me and I'm like, hey, how you doing? How dare you talk to me? It's a very weird thing. You pass someone down south and like, hey, how you doing? Case in point, the Taco Bell. Elmer Fudd ordered a Dr. Pepper. They were out of Dr. Pepper. He had been looking forward to an ice cold Dr. Pepper for like days. He'd been talking about it for days. The woman behind the counter offered to go next door. There was another fast food place, I forget, Bojangles? I forget what it was. Offered to go next door and get him a Dr. Pepper. You think you'd see that in Boston? No way. People would be like, yeah, tough luck, guy, get out of here. So the people, super friendly. Everywhere I went down south, everyone was awesome. For real. Like every location we stopped at in Blairsville and Hiawassee, everybody was super friendly to us. Water, I think a lot of people are worried about water. When we started in Georgia, water was everywhere. At the beginning of the trail, I was drinking an absolute ton of water. And I think people thought I was exaggerating this, but I was legit drinking probably 8 liters a day. Easily. There were days that I would drink even more than that. We'd be walking, I'd load like 2 up, I'd drink one. We'd be passing another one in like 2 miles, and I'd be like, yo, Fudd, I gotta stop real quick. He'd be like, what? How did you drink everything? Like all my water would be gone. So I noticed myself drinking much, much more right in the beginning. It definitely weaned off like near the end of the trail. There were days like I could go like with much shorter water refilling, I guess you'd say. And I think a lot of that had to do with the shape I was in at that time too. I was like a lean, mean walking machine by the end of the trail. So I definitely drank a ton of water. The terrain, of course, as I mentioned, much, much different than what I was used to up in New Hampshire. It was much smoother, substantially less rocks, and they have these things down south called switchbacks. So you don't just go right up a mountain, you kind of zigzag back and forth up the mountain. So that was something new, something I hadn't seen before. The first couple days I felt pretty achy. Your body's gonna have to adjust to this. So I feel like a lot of people really try to push right in the beginning and are like, I'm gonna get to Neels Gap tomorrow. You can do it, awesome, wonderful. But a lot of people, I think, push themselves too hard. They end up either getting like injured or just they're in like copious amounts of pain for no reason. Take it a little bit slow. I think adrenaline kind of takes over and you just want to push. Really fight that, you know, try to pace yourself pretty well in the beginning and start getting accustomed to the mileage and the weight that you're carrying too, you know? That's my opinion on it anyway. I did feel some knee joint pain during that initial beginning period as well, and I was having knee pain before I left for the trail. If you watch my initial gear videos, I had knee braces that I was carrying around with me. I opted to pick up ace bandages, and I just wrapped ace bandages around my knees super tight for about 3 days, and then luckily the soreness went away. Of course, your results may vary. I also kind of changed how I was walking. I found myself leaning forward a lot more, so I made a conscious effort to kind of lean back a little while I was hiking. That may have helped as well. And yeah, after the first week, I mostly felt good. You know, you get some general pain here and there, but while your body is getting accustomed to this constant, you know, walking and exercise with weight on you. I think most people will have soreness for sure, and your fitness level is going to dictate how bad that actually is. But overall, I felt pretty good. My feet. So many people were complaining about blisters in their shoes, and if there's one thing I can't stress enough, find footwear that works for you. Do hikes beforehand and test out footwear. If you're getting blisters, I'm gonna say 95% of the time it's probably because the shoes you were wearing are not fit properly. Definitely invest in good footwear and test it before you get to the trail. If you're having bad feet, especially right in the beginning, it's gonna make your time so much worse. It's gonna be such a mental throw off for you. Definitely look into getting some good footwear and test them out. All right, and that's going to do it, everyone. I hope the video was helpful for you. I'm going to try to get the North Carolina video recorded and hopefully out by March, maybe the first week of March. I'd really like Georgia and North Carolina videos to be available for hikers starting this year, and I feel like the bulk of them start right around March into April. So hopefully that video will be out in time for this year's class to check out. So I hope it helps you either on your through hike, section hike, random hike, whatever you're doing. And if it does, consider dropping the video a like. If you loved it, consider commenting and subscribing. Share some of your trail experiences in Georgia down below. You can follow me on Instagram at Chris Goes Outdoors. And until next time, everyone, we'll catch you in the next one. Take care. Thanks for tuning in.